So former President Trump made a deal with the Taliban last February to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan by May 1st of this year. But now the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee says he expects an extension of that withdrawal timeline, as the new administration has yet to make a decision about whether it will adhere to that time frame or not.
Our next guest, president and founder of the Center for the Studies of Partisanship and Ideology, research fellow, Defense Priorities, Richard Hanania. He just wrote this in Task and Purpose. The same people calling for staying in Afghanistan today are recycling arguments that they used a decade ago. And Richard joins us now to discuss. Richard, what do you generally make of this entire situation around Afghanistan, the Biden administration's arguments, quote unquote, in terms of why we should stay, and just the entire complex of people who are saying the exact same thing today that they have been for a decade?
Well, we need to, go back a little bit and see the history of the Afghan war. So we went in there in 2001. We went in there because of terrorism, obviously, after 9/11. And we've had 20 years of over-optimistic analysis about what's going to happen. The last time there was a real threat for the U.S. to pull out was during Obama's first term. So Obama came in and they convinced him to do a surge, although by some accounts he was sort of pressured into it by the Pentagon. We got up to 100,000 troops in Afghanistan. Things got worse. We were taking more casualties than any time in the war. We were facing spending money, facing the kinds of corruption that nobody had ever seen before in the conflict. A lot of this was documented in the Afghan papers. And for all that investment in lives, in treasure, in Afghani lives, in American lives, things just got worse. And so you can go back to 2014, 2015. You'll see headlines in the New York Times. The Taliban now controls more territory than ever. 2019, 2020, you'll see the same headlines. The Taliban controls more territory than it has since 2001. And so now the question we're facing now is, what are we going to do about this? Now, there's 2,500 troops now. The Biden administration inherited this peace deal with the Taliban. And there's according to media reports, there's three options being considered. First of all is just sticking to the plan, get all American troops out by May 1st. Latest reports are that that's unlikely. He's facing a lot of pressure not to do that. The second possibility is trying to negotiate a stay with the Taliban, trying to negotiate with the Taliban to let the United States stay longer. The reason you need to negotiate with the Taliban is the reason you need this is because they haven't been attacking American troops for about a year. So we just passed the year mark without an American casualty. And that's because the Taliban agreed not to attack America on its way out. Now they're saying, well, just tell them we're going to go back on the deal and we're going to stick around and see if they'll like that. Well, the odds of that happening is very unlikely. And then the third option that they're considering, and so if they don't get out, if the Taliban doesn't agree to let America stay longer, the third option is just continue to do the same thing that we're doing forever. And unfortunately, it looks like that might be a real possibility at this point. So, there's no indication. We tried the light footprint. Right now we have a light footprint. We have 2,500 troops. We tried the large footprint. We tried 100,000. We tried Obama's surge. We tried a counterinsurgency effort. Not as much as some people would have liked, but as much as the American political system will tolerate. And the only consistency is things have been getting worse for 20 years. Yeah. So you can just take a guess at what's going to happen if we decide to stay longer.
Well, and one of the core themes of your piece is not only are we continuing to always get this wrong, but we're getting it wrong by listening to the same people over and over again who've been wrong every single time. Who are those people and why does that keep happening?
Yeah, just anytime you see a general, anytime this latest Afghan study group was a bipartisan commission, that should be an indication that's bad news. They're usually generals they're politicians. Often they were generals who switched over to work for the defense industry. 2/3 of the members of this current study group, whose report we're talking about, actually have ties to the defense industry, the industry that we know of. And you can just look up their names and you can look up what their op-eds were saying 10 years ago, and it's remarkable. One was John Allen, who was head of NATO forces there a decade ago, and he's got op-eds, and he's got op-eds written about him about how he's helping turn the corner. And there's an interview with him that I cite there. He goes into, we've reached a turning point. This was 2011, right?
I remember that.
Yeah, and John Allen is now the president of the Brookings Institute, and they're releasing reports about how we can't leave Afghanistan yet. So you can look up almost to a man. You look up these men or women in some cases. You look at what these people were saying a decade ago. It's the exact same thing they're saying today. And the depressing thing is, if we don't get out now, it could be 2030, and they could be saying the same things.
Well, and Richard, let's talk about this, though, which is that they still have a lot of power. Is that they pushed back against Trump very hard when he was in president. He never was actually really all that ideologically committed in order to doing anything about it. And now under Biden, they're actually empowered. Let's talk about some of the people who are at the top there in the Pentagon in terms of Lloyd Austin and then Secretary of State Tony Blinken. What are their records on Afghanistan?
Yeah, for generally not good. I mean, I don't know if Austin has much of a record of giving his own opinion on these things, but it's notable. I mean, what you allude to is that both of the last two presidents came into office, that is Obama and Trump, different in many ways, but both skeptical of parts of the American empire. Trump ran on getting out of Afghanistan. Obama said he would stay in Afghanistan, but by all accounts, when he got in there and started looking at the options, he became skeptical of the mission. And both of them were convinced to not pull troops out, but were convinced to actually increase the troop numbers. And if you look back at Obama's time, I mean, he's very explicit about this. He's explicit about this in his memoirs. Ben Rhodes talks about this in his memoir. Bob Woodward reports this from at the time, that Obama was skeptical, and he really felt pressured by the generals. The generals were doing leaks. They were basically making his life miserable to try to get as many troops as possible. Trump, it's a similar situation. They basically wore him down. The only reason that he did the deal with the Taliban at the end was, Trump wanted to pull troops out of a lot of places and was skeptical of a lot of American commitments. But actually, Mike Pompeo went along with this one. So this is why they allowed him to do it. And so, yeah, these people are powerful. I mean, Biden tends to be a consensus politician. He tends to, be at the center of where the Democratic Party is, and doesn't like to challenge powerful constituencies. And these people are powerful. Now, I'll say, one optimistic thing is, if you look at the op-eds and you look at what they're writing now, none of them are saying do 100,000 surge, right? They're not saying what they were saying a decade ago. They're saying give us more time to do a more orderly withdrawal. So this shows that the debate has moved. I think that they're just sort of grasping at straws now, and just hope that we forget in 6 months to a year. And if it continued like it is now, where the U.S. is not taking casualties, that's a possibility. But the thing is, the reason we're not taking casualties is because the Taliban hasn't been attacking us, because they think we're going to leave. And so there's no easy option for Biden. There's no easy just sit there and continue at zero casualties. You sit there, the Taliban start attacking again, then it's the choice of leave or start taking regular American casualties, which people might not stand for.
And finally, Richard, you write, it's time to face the fact that it's not simply a matter of the U.S. having chosen the wrong strategy. Rather, the mission to create a functioning, stable democracy in a country that's as poor and geographically and culturally distant from the U.S. as any nation can be was based on false premises. What are the lessons that should be learned from this whole multi-decade debacle?
The number one lesson we should take, that encompasses not just Afghanistan, but Iraq, Syria, Libya, is that we do not have the power or the ability to turn countries into places that have the kind of governments that we like. Often there will be a civil war, and the U.S. say, we don't like side A, we don't like side B. Look, if the U.S. went into Afghanistan and just said, we want to punish the people who did 9/11, and then we really don't care what happens, or we just want to hand it off to a government, or even keep the Taliban in power, but just have a different faction of the Taliban, you could have gotten out 2 decades ago. But we didn't do that. What we did was we said, okay, we had basically the State Department and people in the UN decide what a nice constitution looks like, put in the quotas for women for the parliament, said you're going to have regular elections, said you're going to do this to your economy, you're going to have rights in the Western sense, and we've been fighting 20 years to make that mission happen. That's the same problem with Iraq. It's not that the threat that these nations pose is insurmountable. It's not that it's impossible to leave anything behind. It's that we're engaged in large-scale social engineering. Also, again, the Syrian conflict, it was a civil war between or still is, between a brutal dictator and a movement that's mostly Islamists. And we said, we don't like option A, we don't like option B, and we're going to fight both of them. So we have to be a little bit more connected to reality. One thing that Trump one thing that Trump, I think, realized and got right was if you look at the agreement him and Pompeo they signed with the Taliban, it didn't have any guarantees for democracy or women's rights or anything like that, to the chagrin of many in the sort of more liberal foreign policy establishment. All it said was, look, don't let Afghanistan be used as a staging ground for terrorism. Don't have foreigners come in and make problems for us, and we'll get out. And that was a realistic goal. Unfortunately, Biden might be back to the place of more ambitious goals in Afghanistan, and that would be a huge mistake.
Yeah, and it's not that we don't all support those goals, right? It's just a matter of what's possible. And I think over 2 decades, that's what we've learned. Richard, great piece. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
We'll have more Rising for you after this.